The responsibility for that lies with us because we drove these bank robbers out of business. We locked most of them up. We had a great success rate. If you want to be a copper, look like a copper. And I think that's right.
Good evening, Australia. Welcome to the show. I'm Michael Kuzilny, and this is Tough Times Never Last. Thank you very much for tuning in. On tonight's show, we've got an old-time tough ex-copper called R.Watson. I think more than 35 years in the police force, Squad 5 of 1973, and 7 years in charge of the Victoria's Armed Robbery Squad. That's a long time, isn't it? Was it 35 years, Ray?
It wasn't. It was nearly 30 years. I was in the police force, and I've always said the two happiest days of my life was the day I joined the police force and the day I left.
And the day you got out.
Yeah, you might remember that.
But Ray, the police force changed this. I'm not having a go at racism but there was a police force years ago, and
there was.
And you were in charge of one of the toughest squads, dealing with shooters, dealing with violent criminals who did armed robberies and
of course, the face of crime have changed a lot because when I was there in the 80s and 90s, we used to have about 3 bank robberies a week, 3 major bank robberies a week, full-blown, take no prisoners, all that sort of thing. And now they're lucky if they have one every month or two. And the responsibility for that lies with us because we drove these bank robbers out of business. We locked most of them up. We had a great success rate, and I'm pretty happy with that. And we used techniques that were probably fairly advanced for their times, but they were fairly brutal. I'm not saying there's no kid gloves used, but these people we were chasing, they went along with handguns, sawn-off shotguns, robbed banks, terrorised people who were not only customers but staff, and they got their just rewards, which was the money that they sought, and that's why they were hard to catch, and we catch them we did, so it was enjoyable.
And you worked with a bunch of how many blokes? 10 blokes?
No, we had about 24.
24?
Yeah, 24 guys. And what I remember about the armed robbery squad is that you might announce to a crew nearby that you're going to do an early morning raid. Can you give us a hand? Nobody ever knocked you back for an early morning raid. In fact, people were offended that they weren't asked. And I thought, this is interesting because out in a division, it's completely different. People don't want to go on early morning raids. But in a squad, people clamour to go on early morning raids. And I just thought that was the difference between playing in the firsts and playing in the seconds.
Ray, back in those days, I suppose these days a lot of coppers get to Facebook and Google and find out where things are happening.
Sure.
Back in your days, it was a collator, wasn't it?
We had a collator. We had an analyst or a collator.
Analyst?
Same thing. We had an analyst who, she was very good at what she did. She subsequently resigned from the police force just before I did, and she became flight attendant with Qantas.
Wow.
And then she, I know that she just recently had a baby, and more importantly, she became in charge of the Qantas training section. So she trained people on how to do that. And I'm not surprised. When I hear this story, I'm not surprised that she was elevated to that task or that role, because I know she'd be good at it.
And Ray?
Yes, sir.
How did the squad know that there were some filthy crooks with sawn-off shotguns just about to do a hit at the Commonwealth Bank wanting to...
Oh, okay, but that's right. We had a couple of things. We were told by many people who had robbed a bank or robbed an institution, so we targeted that. And as, again, you would know, that you can't just go and grab somebody and lock them up. You've got to have evidence. So sometimes you might be successful and sometimes not. But sometimes during that particular operation or operational phase, you would find out that the crook number A was planning on robbing another bank. And that was fantastic because then you would target that particular person or that group of persons, find out what bank they're going to rob, and you'd set up an operation where you'd catch them as they went in to rob the bank. And then the police force became a bit of nervous Nellies because they changed the fact, and we knew that a bank in Clarendon Street, South Melbourne was going to be robbed. We were told. We put all the Special Operations Group and the dogs and ourselves out there ready to catch these blokes. We didn't know who they were, mind you. We knew the premises, we knew the rough date, but we didn't know who was going to be involved. So we did what I think you'd imagine that we would do. we would target that bank in South Melbourne. Now, nothing happened, as it turned out, but of course, before nothing happened, the inspector of the squad had been told to pull everybody out because we couldn't have any violence. Well, I thought, you couldn't have any violence. That's what we're paid to do. We're not paid to be violent, but we're there to apprehend violent people. And I thought that sort of left me a bit stunned. And I think that's where the rot set in. I thought, look, this is just rubbish. You know, we don't want to see people hurt. Nobody wants to see anybody hurt. But of course, when you're waging war, there are going to be some casualties on both sides. We didn't seek that, but of course, the police force became very nervous about us and other squads conducting that sort of operation. Interesting, to say the least.
Ray, I remember when I was talking to, I think, many years ago, I was at the Gym and Lifestyle Frankston, and Bob Hill, when he was a young fellow, I think he might have been in the armed robbery squad, and yes. I can't remember the exact story, but there was a bunch of coppers suspended for murder.
Yes, Bob Hill was one of them.
That's right. Was that...
yes, and he's back now. He's Assistant Commissioner.
Indeed.
Robert Hill. He's
Yeah.
called Robert now, not Bob. And I haven't seen Robert. I saw Robert last year at a police funeral. And incidentally, or coincidentally, Mark Wiley, who was shot at the armed robbery squad, who's a detective sergeant, he got shot in the stomach by Peter Michael Reid during a raid. And I was at Russell Street CIB in those days, and I was on leave. I got a phone call from my senior sergeant at Russell Street saying, you are to report to the armed robbery squad next Monday to replace Mark Wiley. And I was dragged down there kicking and screaming. But once I got down there, I realised that these are pretty good blokes. And Mark Wiley lived to tell the tale, and the squad looked after him as far as financially and did what they could morally. And he left the police force a couple of years before I did, around about the year 2000. And again, I think he worked for Qantas. He was a very articulate, very eloquent chap, very well dressed. And he hanged himself last year.
Oh, so did he?
He did desk of bail.
Had enough.
And I thought, wow, how could you ever pick that? Nobody could predict it. I didn't mix with him socially that much. I saw him now and again.
And Ray, what happened to those 10 guys who got suspended? What was that all about?
Judge Vincent...
Actually, we might talk about that after the next break, but okay. you know the story I'm talking about,
I know the story very well.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. We'll be back very shortly with R.Watson. Thank you very much for watching. Tough Times Never Last. I'm Michael Kuzilny, and I'm speaking to the great man R.Watson, tough cop from the old days, in charge of the armed robbery squad when we still had one, when we still needed one. I really think the police force gone a bit soft, and that's why there's so many more crimes and people attacking prison guards, and it's all falling apart. Because the government says we've got to tread very softly and make it a police service, not a police force. I was squad 14 of 86, spent about 10 years, got a taste, but this man, squad 5 of 73, almost 30 years, and policing was different in those days.
Oh, it was a lot different, yes. It was a lot different, I'm pleased to say, because it suited my style.
Because people wanted to shoot you and kill you, and you had to shoot back. And Mark Milantone wasn't so lucky because he tried to blow you away.
Mark Milantone, we'd been chasing for a while, and he was frequenting a flat in Kensington, and unbeknownst to him and his cohorts, we rented a flat adjacent to this where he was living. And he was also living in North Melbourne. And he was awake up to the use of undercover surveillance and all that sort of stuff. So, and I remember we tried to get a warrant for a listening device for the flat, and we weren't able to get the warrant because there was a hiccup with the legislation at that particular time, and it covered a couple of months of that area of our concern. So we had the dogs on him this particular day. He was coursing around Flemington with this other chap. He was looking for a bank to rob in Footscray, in that Footscray market area. And he was up and down, round and round and round. There's no doubt he was going to rob a bank, and we were going to catch him and his mate. And as it turned out, he spotted the undercover coppers, or what he thought was, we'll never know that, and he decided to go back to Kensington. He dropped his mate off, then he went down to a car yard and changed cars. He was coursing around Flemington, near the Flemington racetrack, and myself and a fellow by the name of Rod Porter were left there behind with our crews, and we had the dogs on Militano, and the job was to, or the idea was to locate Militano, put him in somewhere safe, and swoop and capture him. And as it turned out, I think Rod Porter said to me, Militano's actually driving towards us. You can see his car. And I thought, oh, Jesus. So I made the decision. I said to Rod, listen, what we'll do is when he gets about 100 yards away, we'll drive forwards, we'll block his path, and we'll arrest him at gunpoint. And that's what we tried to do, because when he came to a screeching stop, we did too, and he got out of the car with a revolver and pointed it at us. And the guys I was with fired a couple of shotguns at his windscreen, and the windscreen deflected the bullets, or the shots, and then he was off running, and I chased after him, and he turned around and aimed his gun at me, and I did the same thing, and I fired, and he fired at the same time, and I shot him, and he missed me. And I think my first instinct was the guys who I was with ran over to him, and there was a jockey who was on the footpath near where I was standing, and I said, listen, please stay here. The police will want to speak to you. I am the police, but we will want to speak to you. And I know who he was. I won't mention his name now, but the thing is, that's where he stopped and stayed. And Militano unfortunately got a fatal gunshot wound by that confrontation with me, and he died there and then. And he was a severe drug addict. I'm not saying that he was a goody two-shoes by any means, and he certainly didn't deserve to die, and he had a family like we all do.
And Ray, you were a good shot. What were you trained at? Pistols and shotguns? We
were trained in that, but I don't think I was that good a shot. He was unlucky that was my day to shoot him, and I think if I had to do it again, I wouldn't be able to do it.
No.
Anyway.
But folks, it's quite interesting. When the show used to be called A Life in Crime, I spoke to quite a few of the old-time crooks who did time at Pentridge, but they said when the great man R.Watson came with his team, he was very tough. There was no time to move. It was all too early in the mornings. They would kick the door down and everybody be on the ground. They said very tough, very mean, but then very fair as well. So
I don't think I was very mean.
You had them. Well, when they had the guns to their head, maybe that's why they were very tough.
I remember I can tell a little story. The Major Crime Squad, who were looking for some escapees, asked us to give them a hand at Pascoe Vale. They were short-staffed, and we said, okay, well, myself and again Rod Porter, who sat near me. We were both sergeants at the time, and we decided we'd help them, and we met them at Pascoe Vale, and we covered the back of the house, and they did the front, and they put the doors in, and it was like a chaotic scene. And we rushed into this house under the cover of darkness, and there's bodies flying everywhere, and fists and arms, and God knows what. And I saw this arm, and I decided to hit it. And I had a little baseball bat that I'd found nearby, and I hit this arm, this bare arm, as hard as I could. Well, Rod Porter owned that arm. And he called me a number of names, which I dare not repeat, and I suppose I deserve that. But nonetheless, when you look back now, it hurt at the time, and it wasn't that, well, it was funny for me, but nonetheless, we still laugh about it now, and that's the good thing.
Didn't Rod end up marrying a lady called Marielle, and
yes,
they ended up
yes.
at a caravan park?
Yes, I saw Rod Porter
and
Marielle at another funeral late last year. Oh, it was only a couple of months ago. And I'm sure you know this man, a fellow's name was Chris Dorman.
Oh, yes.
And the digger was a detective at the Armed Robbery Squad.
Oh.
He was a very good detective, very charismatic chap.
Mm.
His father was an English policeman in Hong Kong, and his mother was a Chinese national, also from Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. And they produced Digger. And I thought, he's nothing like a digger would be. Digger is half Chinese, and but a very funny man. And he used to play football. And Digger would often come into my office at the Armed Robbery Squad at 412 St Kilda Road and said, Ray, he said, have you ever seen arms as big as mine? And I said, Digger, everybody here has got arms bigger than yours. And so that was his style of humour. He was very funny, he was laid back, and more importantly, he was a good detective, and I liked his way.
Ray, it's quite amazing that almost 30 years of catching violent crooks, one would think, oh, what a stressful job, but you had to create a bit of fun amongst the team, didn't you?
That's it, because I think, you can be a sad sack all your life, but if you have a bit of fun and there's times to be serious and there's times not to be. And I just choose that I've always believed that it was much easier to be serious or to discipline somebody if you had a sense of fun and, I suppose something that was less than reality.
That's good advice. We'll back shortly after the next break. Don't go away, we'll back shortly. Thank you very much for tuning in wherever you are. Lovely man, this R.Watson guy. Always had good sense of humour, even though he's had one of the toughest jobs in Australia. Dealing with some people say dealing with human garbage. People who equip themselves with shotguns and wanting to take lives so they can get money and go out and lavish holidays. I think it's quite selfish behaviour. Doesn't matter how much you slice it, Oh, poor victims, they might be drug addicts. But no, I think all of society would, I think, be proud of a team of people who get rid of those sort of people out of the community, because anybody could get killed in those sort of jobs, innocent bystanders.
Oh, sure, exactly.
So you did a terrific job. And you've gone through your challenges along the way, and there's always challenges in the police force, whether it's internal or
that's right,
with people. But
most of it is internal.
A lot of it's internal, isn't it?
It's internal, yes. And you deal with these people who've got no idea.
No.
And they protect, I don't know why they're there. They protect themselves, or they protect. One case, I had a bloke who protected the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, this is a bit weird. And you had to be very careful what you said around this particular gentleman.
Yeah.
And again, no names, no pactorial, but I thought, wow, this is he's very protective of the Catholic Church. And again, I'm not throwing stones, but he made no secret of it. And I thought, well, this is interesting. Well, why do that?
There was a big cover up in the 60s, 70s, 80s about all the rapes and the sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, and it went right up to the chief commissioners and politicians who
I think it probably did.
Who covered it up and allegedly. Ray, have times changed? Have they changed in the way you see Melbourne now?
Yeah, look, I think times have changed. I think crime is more prevalent. Outrageous crime is more prevalent. People are being carjacked and hijacked and bushwhacked. How does this occur? I think race may play a part in it. May, I don't know. But that's been said.
Yes, sir.
Of course, there are gangs that are more prevalent. The police force take a different style. There's a different style of policing. And I have a nephew who not long ago joined the police force. And I think he sits down to go to the toilet. He's that sort of chap. I don't like him, really. But the thing is, whether I like him or not doesn't matter. The thing is, he sees things much differently than I. And doesn't mean I'm right. Doesn't mean he's right. But things are different. And that's how things occur, I think.
Too soft. Is the police force too soft?
Well, I think it is. But the thing is, if I say that, am I regarded as being too hard?
No.
Am I regarded as being too conservative? Or maybe I am, I don't know.
Ray, when you watched that case at Burke Street, that maniac who ended up running into all those people, it wasn't handled right, was it? I mean, there was police there was people there, and I mean, it's easy to say it wasn't handled right, but even there was not enough action. Or no action.
Why did you clench your hand then when you said action?
Oh, somebody should have jumped through his window or something.
I think maybe that's right, because it's hard to know. And I say I have clear views about how things should be. And I think it starts off with, and I noticed in New South Wales, where people wear beards to work. Now, I'm not anti-beard, but I think if a detective sergeant said to me years ago when I first joined, if you want to be a copper, look like a copper. And I think that's right, because this day and age, people wear anything they like. They wear beards and God knows what. And good luck to them. I don't really care. I'm not anti-beard. But I think that the Chief Commissioner, and Ken Lay was a good example of this, said to everybody, no, there will be no beards. You'll wear your hair properly. For example, you'll wear proper uniform, and some people didn't like that. Well, I thought, well, why did you join the police force? We are a conservative organisation, and we deal with the other strata of society on many occasions. And I just don't, there's some things I just don't understand. But things change. And as you well know, Michael, society is a fluid thing, and it keeps changing, and the police force has got to keep up with it. And again, we have our own views about what's right and what's wrong. Doesn't mean they're right and wrong, but that's what we're stuck with. And I guess we pass it down to our children. And my children are probably no different to anybody else's. I've got one who's a bit of a fire breather, but nonetheless, she's a good person, and I think they all are all good people. That's what I...
Ray, reflecting on your beautiful journey in the Victoria Police, what were the most two dangerous situations and the most two happiest situations?
I think I was very unhappy when I went to the police academy on a reunion, which was about a year ago, when Squad 5 of 73 was the first squad to start the complete training at the Victoria Police Glen Waverley Academy. And a old boss was there, Chief Commissioner Mick Miller, who you might recall Mick Miller was, still is, a very eloquent person, a great leader.
He's 90 now, isn't he?
And he's got on. And for me to see him in the flesh with the passage of some years, I thought, wow, yeah, he still spoke very well. He still had a good memory, but he had certainly become very frail. And I felt that's what time's done. Only time's done this. The man is still the same, really, but time has emasculated him a bit to the situation he now finds himself in. And I wish him well. I wish him nothing but the best. And I think the other occasion that springs readily to mind is I bred horses for many years with a fellow who's a county court judge. It's no secret. And the thing is, I was going to the races one day at St Arnaud. It's a non-TAB race meeting at St Arnaud. I had my youngest daughter with me, and we're driving along towards, not far from St Arnaud, and we got pulled over by the police. And I thought, oh God, she said, what's the matter, Dad? I said, we're being pulled over by the police. And do you ever see that movie Vacation with Chevy Chase, where the copper pulled over these people, and that music, the police music was in the background, dum dum dum, and this copper was walking towards me, and he had the sunglasses on, and he didn't look very happy with the world, and I thought. As he got closer, I recognised him. He was my ex-roommate from the police academy. And I said to Holly, watch this, block your ears. And I wound down the window a little bit. It was a hot day, and I wound the window a little bit. And he said, you got your licence there, driver? And I said, well, who the F are you? And he goes, what? And he wanted to rip me through the windscreen. And then he saw who I was, and we got out. And we embraced in the middle of this highway near St Arnaud, which wasn't a good look. When on reflection, that was a very ordinary look. And, of course, then I went back to the police station to have a cup of tea. And I left him in good humour, went to the races, returned home, and then about 3 months later, he killed himself. Shot himself with a pistol at the police station where we'd had a cup of tea. And his name was Jim Wiggins, a fine man, a great policeman, and he liked that country life. And credit to him, because he was doing his job and he was well-intentioned, and for some reason life took its toll on him, and he thought the only way out was to end it all.
What a shame, Ray.
Shocking, terrible.
Ray, thank you for sharing the mixture of good and bad. Great to have you on.
It's been fun.
We'll see you again. Thanks for coming all the way from the country, and thank you very much for watching, everybody. We'll be back next week. I'm Michael Kuzilny. Good night.